Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Clinton Presidential Center. As always, and this is a Clinton Presidential Center Presents event, co-sponsored by the Clinton School of Public Service, the Clinton Foundation, and the Clinton Presidential Library and Museum. And we are thrilled y'all are here for this conversation. You know, when we think of libraries, we think of either public libraries, whether it was a small town library where some of us learned to love books, or massive libraries like the New York Public Library, or we think of school libraries, from elementary schools where we fell in love with reading, or large, massive university research libraries. Tonight we're going to hear about two organizations that have library in their name, but are nothing like our traditional notion of a library. The Library of Congress and the Presidential Libraries of the National Archives and Records Administration are two of our most important public cultural institutions. And this conversation is going to allow you to learn things about these two entities with interlocking missions. I think you'll be surprised about the scope of their work as civic education and outreach instruments, and their plans to further serve as a resource to the American people. This includes their work in the year ahead as we prepare for America's 250th birthday on July 4th, 226, an event known colloquially and hopefully more publicly as A250. These are institutions, of course, where leadership shifts have occurred in recent months, but as you'll hear, they have remained fully invested in this component of their civic education mission. On stage is Abby Krolik. Abby is the Education Resource Specialist at the Library of Congress, and she is a practiced education professional dedicated to forging meaningful connections between learners and the arts, history, civics, and culture, with a particular emphasis on museum-based learning. On the screen is Nicole Ferraiolo, who we had originally hoped to have with us in person, but who joins us through the magic of technology and through Jake in the back. And Nikki is the Director of Public Engagement for the Office of Presidential Libraries at the National Archives and Records Administration. In this position, Nikki works with an amazing team to facilitate public engagement across the 16 presidential libraries and museums in the presidential library system. Nikki and Abby have both been participating in the Arkansas Council for the Social Studies that has been meeting here at the Clinton Center for the last couple of days, and we've had about 6 Arkansas educators here thinking about how to better do civics education and other aspects of social studies. And I want to thank my colleague, Kathleen Pate, who you'll see in a bit, who's been a key part of organizing that. Moderating tonight's conversation called Not That Kind of Library, is our friend, Dr. Kristin D Mann from the UA Little Rock History Department. Dr. Mann joined the faculty at UA Little Rock in 2003. Dr. Mann is a former high school history and geography teacher who has prepared dozens of teachers for the classroom as coordinator of the department's social studies education program. And as such, over the years, she has been a fantastic partner for those of us at the Clinton Presidential Center. Dr. Mann, please take it away. Thank you all.
Well, thank you, and we're delighted to be here tonight to talk to you about the kind of work that these unique libraries do. So we're going to start by just asking Abby and Nikki to tell us a little bit about their institutions and what distinguishes the Library of Congress and the National Archives Presidential Libraries from other federal institutions or libraries. So Abby?
Sure. Yeah. So our institutions obviously are both federal. The most obvious difference is in the name. We are the Library of Congress, so we are part of the legislative branch of the federal government, whereas you'll find that the National Archives are part of the executive branch. So I'll let Nikki tell you more about that. But I do have some slides here just to give you a quick overview. So our Library of Congress is the largest library in the world, though I did learn today that National Archives has way more items. In any case, our mission is to collect and preserve and provide access to a rich and diverse, enduring source of knowledge in order to inform, inspire, and engage you, the American people, in your intellectual and creative endeavors. and you'll find those words, inform, inspire, engage. They really pop up everywhere. They are the core of our mission. I think I went too far, sorry about that. So there are 4 main components to what the Library of Congress does. The first is that we were created with the idea of supporting members of Congress and their research needs. And today you'll find that in the Congressional Research Service Department, otherwise known as CRS. And so they are a huge part of the library today, and they work so hard to respond to questions from congressional offices about pretty much any topic you can think of, and they provide reports and all kinds of support to them. And then we also have the US Copyright Office is part of the library, and a large part of our collection comes to us through copyright. So that is another, anything that is being registered for copyright protections, that comes through the library. So that's another big piece of what we do. And then all of that kind of is the reason why we have so much, and it's why we've become a research institution, not just for Congress, but for the general public. And so we support all kinds of researchers coming either to us in person or using our resources online. And then if you do come in person, we have our beautiful Jefferson building, and within that building you can get a tour, you can view rotating exhibits, and so in that way we are also a public museum space. And then just a few fun facts about the library's collections. We have over 181 million items, and about 15,000 come in every day, so it's constantly growing. Only about 10,000 actually make it into the permanent collection, but that's still growing by a lot. And within those collections, actually only half are in English. That's something a lot of people don't realize, is that we have very international collections, and that over 470 languages are represented there. We also have the world's largest comic book collection, another fun fact that people are usually surprised by. And then we have, this is where we sort of overlap a little bit with National Archives, is that we also hold some presidential papers, just not the same ones. We have 23 presidential papers ranging in time from George Washington to Calvin Coolidge. And since we are going to be talking about America 250, I thought I'd highlight a couple founding documents that you can find in our collection. On the left here, you see the U.S. Articles of Confederation, published in Williamsburg, Virginia in 1777. And on the right, you've got a rough draft of the Declaration of Independence. And I put that up there also as an illustrative example of the difference between our two institutions. So you'll hear Nikki talk about the National Archives being an official record of the government. And for us, we are a record of creative and intellectual endeavors. And so whereas the National Archives has the official Declaration of Independence signed by John Hancock and everyone there at the time, we have Jefferson's rough draft. So that's just an example of how we differ and complement each other. And then I do want to highlight that you don't have to come to the library to use our resources. At our website, www.loc.gov, you can find all kinds of things. We have been on the forefront of digitizing items from our collection for decades, and even though it's a small fraction of 181 million, that's still a lot of things. So you can find not just books, but manuscripts, tons of old newspapers and photographs, music, poetry, posters. We also have recordings of our public programs on there, so it's a place to get lost in a good way. And this is just what the webpage looks like, and I highlighted some shortcuts down at the bottom. It's a little hard to see because it's bright sun still, but you have some shortcuts to the catalog and different collections, information for researchers or visitors. We have a teachers page that I'll show you on the next slide, and blogs, copyright. There's also, you can access congress.gov, which will be all things legislative, and our little not-so-secret weapon, Ask a Librarian. because as researchers, getting lost is part of the game, and sometimes you need a little help. So you can always reach our librarians, and they are amazing. They can help you find what you're looking for and get back to you pretty quickly. And then this is the teachers page, so it just gives a little overview of some of our resources that we have for educators, including some grab-and-go sets. And since I know we have a few of the teachers from the conference here today, I just wanted to highlight that. And then they'd asked us to provide a little history of our institution, and so I have a little timeline. We are one of the oldest institutions in the U.S. In terms of the government. We were started in 1800 when President John Adams approved an act of Congress providing money to provide books within the Capitol building for members of Congress. And at the time, it was mostly just legal books. And then came along the War of 1812. And I'm sure many of you here are aware that there was a Battle of Washington in 1814 in which the British burned down the Capitol building. And with it, obviously, those books. And so we had to start over. And Thomas Jefferson was so appalled at the state of things and eager to provide the library and with resources that he actually offered to sell his personal library to Congress. And so and you can see over 6,000 volumes. And that becomes really the bedrock for the Library of Congress and how we move forward, because I think many of us know that Thomas Jefferson was a polymath. He wasn't just interested in the law, he was interested in everything. And so his collection has a bit of everything, and that becomes our philosophy going forward in terms of collecting. Then 1870 was when the Copyright Office gets placed within the library, and suddenly our collections just boom, and we need a lot more space. So after 20 hard years of planning and construction, what we now call the Jefferson Building, which is what most of us think about when we think about the Library of Congress, that finally opens to the public. And then the library keeps on expanding. So in 1939 and 1980, you get two more buildings, the Adams Building and the Madison Building. The website debuts in 1994. The first National Book Festival took place in 2001, and we're about to have our 25th in early September. And then our final campus is the Packard Campus for Audiovisual Conservation, and that's in Culpeper, Virginia, about 90 miles or 90 minutes south of Washington, D.C. And that's where we keep sort of old film and audio in very particular conservation environments. And just to elaborate a little more on the role of Jefferson in the Library of Congress, obviously he was a very important figure for the library. As I mentioned before, his philosophy of what kind of knowledge was important for Congress to have access to became our philosophy as well. And it was also very important to him that any democracy provide access to all kinds of knowledge. And so our mission expanded from just serving Congress to serving the entire American people. And if you visit our library, you can actually see we have a display of his books. Many of them are original, but not all, because fire was a major problem in the 19th century. So there was another fire in 1851 that unfortunately destroyed about 2/3 of his library. But you can see replacement books or books of a similar vintage. So yeah, that's what I've got about the Library of Congress.
Thank you so much. Well, Nikki, let's hear a little bit about how the presidential libraries are different from the Library of Congress.
Yes, thank you. So again, I'm Nicole Ferraiolo. I am Director of Public Engagement for the Presidential Libraries at the National Archives. So as Abby mentioned, the National Archives and Records Administration is an independent federal agency that preserves and shares the story of our nation, government, and the American people. So this includes the Charters of Freedom, like you see the Constitution behind me. We have the final version of the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights. So it's these treasured holdings like that as well as things that are actually equally valuable, which are the holdings of the American people as well. And so people who did things like write letters to the presidents, as well as the records of the executive branch of the federal government, many of the legislative records as well. In total, NARA has over 13 billion records. So I'm here not to talk about the National Archives more generally, although always happy to speak about the institution, but I'm here specifically to talk about the presidential library system. So, as you know, there are many presidential sites across the country, and the National Archives manages the federal presidential library system, which is 16 archives and museums holding the records and artifacts of every president since Herbert Hoover. So what is a presidential library? So as the title of this talk suggests, presidential libraries are not that kind of library. For the most part, they aren't places that you would go to check out books. Presidential libraries, they're archives, they're museums. They bring together the documents and artifacts of a president and his administration, and they present them to the public both for study, but also for discussion and also for interpretation. And this is without regard of political considerations or affiliations. Presidential libraries and museums, like their holdings, belong to the American people. So our presidential libraries have two primary functions. The first is to preserve and provide access to these collections for researchers and students and anyone else who's interested in learning more about our history and the American experience. And second, we engage with broad public audiences through our museums, programs, and educational offerings. So what you might find at a presidential library are, again, collections of presidential records and artifacts. You'll find research rooms where you can study. You'll find permanent and temporary exhibitions. You'll find programming and special events. And then you'll also find educational experiences and resources for students and teachers. So moving on to the next slide. Many presidential papers and records let me back up a little bit. So as Abby mentioned, we were asked to talk a little bit about the founding of our institutions, and we realized both of our institutions were founded by pretty significant presidencies. And so whereas the Library of Congress was founded, had Thomas Jefferson played a major, major role in its founding, as well as John Adams, the presidential library system owes a lot of its history and background to FDR, so Franklin Roosevelt. So Franklin Roosevelt raised funds to build a library on the property of his family home in Hyde Park, New York. And the reason for that was in part because before that, many presidential papers and records had been lost or destroyed or sold for profit or ruined by poor storage conditions. And in 1939, FDR was hoping that we could have a better alternative. So the archivist during FDR's time, Dr. R.D.W. Connor, recalled years later his first meeting with Roosevelt, and this was the same meeting where he was appointed archivist of the United States. And so Connor described this meeting saying that Roosevelt, at this meeting, delivered a dissertation on the importance of the National Archives and added at the end, you know, it's my baby. And it was Roosevelt's baby. Roosevelt actually drew up the plans for his own presidential library. So, and in addition to that, he also planned to be buried there as well, and that's also where you can find his grave. So many other presidents were inspired by this, and we even formalized it with the Presidential Library Act in 1955, which established a system of privately built and federally maintained facilities for preserving the papers of the presidents. So Harry Truman came next with his library in 1957, and this was established in his hometown of Independence, Missouri. And then came Herbert Hoover. Even though he preceded FDR in his presidency, he decided to build his library near his boyhood home in West Branch, Iowa. And this happened in 1962 on Hoover's 88th birthday. And nearly every president since has followed their lead. But it wasn't until the Presidential Records Act of 1978 that the records of our presidents became official property of the United States government. And ever since Ronald Reagan, the Archivist of the United States has assumed custody of the records at the end of each administration. And this was also motivated by Richard Nixon's presidency, which had its records made federal by its own special legislation. I also wanted to say a word about presidential foundations. So each library also works in partnership with a presidential foundation. And this is typically led by former administration members or family members or other people that have a meaningful connection to the president. So the foundations raise money and promote the history and the legacy of the president, while NARA is strictly nonpartisan in its work. So this means that the missions of the foundations and NARA are aligned, but they're not identical. So occasionally you may see that we pursue distinct messages or have different priorities, but at almost all of our sites, we work extremely closely with the foundations, and this is an incredibly important relationship for us. So on to the next slide. As you can see from this map, our presidential libraries are spread out all across the country. So each president selects the site for their presidential library and establishes a foundation to raise funds and support the planning. And then in partnership with NARA, we'll oversee the construction of the archival facility and museum. The presidents have chosen sites of their childhood homes or maybe special places that are meaningful to them, maybe a university that they were connected to. Most recently, the Obamas decided to build a private museum facility that was not part of the presidential library system. So in the meantime, we are busy digitizing the papers of the administration and building our first primarily digital presidential library, which will be based at Archives 2 in College Park, Maryland, where our main office is located. Another thing worth mentioning is that we have a library passport program. So you can visit the presidential libraries, any one of the libraries, and get your passport. And then you can get it stamped at all the presidential libraries. Okay, last slide. So during the discussion, we'll speak more, but before we went, I just wanted to make sure that you knew how to contact us. You can contact us through the various presidential libraries' websites. There will be contact information for each one. But you can, if you go to archives.gov/presidential-libraries, you can find many methods of contacting either NARA or the individual libraries. So thank you.
Thanks so much. Well, I know that going to visit these libraries is a little bit different than just going around the corner to your CALS branch and showing your library card to check out a book. So I'm curious how many people here have visited the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. before? That's a pretty good number of people. How about how many people have visited another presidential library besides this presidential library? Okay, good. And how many of you have visited multiple presidential libraries besides this one? Okay, excellent. So we've got a good, well-traveled crowd here. Well, it is a little bit more involved of a process if you want to go as a researcher versus going as a guest to check out the galleries. So we're going to find out a little bit more about what it's like to do research or to go visit the Library of Congress and the National Archives or one of the presidential libraries. So we'll start with Abby on that.
Sure, yeah. So if you want to do research at the library, actually in person, there are two things that you need to do. First is to get your reader's card, and anyone 16 and older can do this. You do have to arrive in person to finish the process, but there is also an online form that you can submit ahead of time. And so the whole process doesn't take very long at all. And then that card is good for 2 years. And it gives you access to all 21 of our reading rooms. And if you'd like to just go and browse, you can do that with most of the reading rooms. The rare book and special collections room is the exception. That one you always need an appointment. If you would like to do actual research, like really looking deeply at particular items, it is highly recommended that you do make an appointment and an official request of the items that you'd like to see so that you can give the staff time to locate those items. Some of them might also be stored off-site, so give them time to bring them on-site and have them ready for you. And that's so I mentioned there's 21 reading rooms, and they each kind of have a different focus. So many of them are by geographic area. Some of them are particular to the format, like prints and photographs or music. And then we do have the main reading room, which is that beautiful circular building in the center of Jefferson Building, and that's kind of a mix of topics.
And if we don't want to do research, but we just want to come visit and see the beautiful painted ceiling and some of the exhibits there, how does that work?
Yeah, so for that, we do require a timed pass, but they're fairly easy to get depending on the season. So around now and throughout the summer, you might want to plan a few days in advance. But in the down season, in the winter, I think it's pretty easy to do that.
Okay, thanks. Nikki, how about the presidential libraries and the National Archives?
So I love this question because my first experience with the National Archives was as a researcher. And I, for years and years after that, described College Park as my happy place. So it's been wonderful to come back here and work every day. And even if I'm not researching, sometimes I will go to the research room and do some writing or write some emails just because I love it so much. But if you want to be a researcher at the National Archives, whether it's at the Presidential Libraries or in the A1 building in downtown DC or in College Park, Maryland, the best thing to do first is to look online and find out, first of all, do we have it? Or actually, is this record held by the Library of Congress or some other archive? And then also figure out, is it already available online? We have a massive digitization program at NARA. Library of Congress is similar. I remember walking by our digitization lab in A2 recently, and they have these numbers across the bottom of the window. And I asked one of the researchers there, one of the workers there, like, what are these numbers? And those numbers were the number of pages digitized during the fiscal year. And this was a couple months ago. And so back in April, how many pages we had digitized in the fiscal year was over 5 million. So they are efficient there from January to April, 5 million items digitized. So definitely look online, see if you don't even have to leave the comfort of your home and you can just access a digital copy. But since we have 13 billion records, the chances are that they are not digitized yet. So look online, see if it's available. Also make sure that it is declassified. There is a massive declassification center at NARA, and so we need to actually make sure that these things are actually available. And then find out what site it's at. Because NARA is spread out all across the country. We have the presidential libraries, we have federal research centers as well. So you don't want to show up in Washington, D.C. and then discover that your document that you need or your collection is in Atlanta, Georgia, right? And so, so definitely check our catalog and then make sure that it also is really helpful to call ahead. The archivists are real people. They love what they do, and they have an incredibly deep knowledge of these collections and NARA's system, and would be happy to point you in the right direction.
And can you tell us?
And also check our website. There actually are detailed instructions on our website.
Very detailed. I just went through that process last year, and it involves emails and video conference appointments ahead of time and lots of things.
They want to know if you're going to study JFK.
That's right. Can you tell us a little bit about, if you just want to visit the facilities? So NARA has two different branches in Washington, D.C. One's mainly to look at the documents. The other one has more of a museum component like the Presidential Library. Right. So can you tell us what there is to see if you're not doing research?
Yes, if you are not doing research, there is plenty to see, both at the Presidential Libraries and in D.C. Not all the presidential libraries, but most of them have like full-scale museums with interactive exhibits, and sometimes they have permanent exhibitions, they have temporary rotating ones, so there's always something really interesting on display. There is also, you'll find public programs. For instance, like many of them, for 4th of July this year, the Hoover Library is hosting an Iowa brass band concert, right? So there are things that feel that, there are things that are like directly related to the presidency, and then there are also other things that are more intentionally geared towards the community. And so you'll see a different flavor of public programming and events at different presidential libraries, also because of who their audiences are. And then of course we have like robust educational programming as well, and all sorts of ways to interact with the collections, and I'll stop there.
Okay. Well, I just did some research at the Truman Library and at the National Archives in College Park this past fall, and it was a really interesting experience compared to my earlier Latin American history experience at the Library of Congress. One thing that was really interesting, I was working on the 1950 savings bond campaign and the replica Liberty Bells that it produced. The Secretary of the Treasury's papers were at the Truman Library, so I had to go there to consult those, whereas the Department of Treasury records and the Savings Bond Division were at the National Archives, so you had to actually go to both places if you wanted to do that research. So that was interesting, and I was especially thankful to the foundation, the Truman Foundation, which provided support for that research. And if you ever get a chance to go do research in those places, the archivists are so nice, but they have very specific rules about where you can touch the documents and where they can be on your table. And I think I might have gotten in trouble a couple of times, but one day I didn't. I consider that a victory for sure. So they're taking very good care of their documents. And I know that we're really excited about the semi-quincentennial coming up. Celebrations are already happening all around the country. So over the next year, what are some of the kinds of programs you're providing for the public, for students and teachers surrounding the 250th anniversary of American independence?
Yeah, so we have some things that are geared specifically to students and teachers, some things that are general public, for example, some exhibits that are opening. In fact, one's already open called The Two Georges, which explores the kind of parallel lives of George Washington and King George III, and that will be open through March of 2026. And there'll be some other exhibits as well. We'll also be opening this December a new hands-on research studio for young people. So for, we give the reader's cards to anyone 16 and older, but for those younger than that, this is an opportunity for them to get a sense of what the library is about and what research is about. And so it'll have a lot of really great programming around it and activities for kids to get immersed in that idea of all the things you can do with research, not just academic, but also creative. So that's a big thing that we've been looking forward to. I know that the themes of the semi-sesquicentennial, that is going to be, dispersed throughout all of our public programming in the year of 2026, and will be participating in some of the national level things. For example, America's Field Trip, which is a contest run by the National Commission for grades, I think it's 3rd through 12th, and they have to respond to the question, what America means to you, and then the winners and a chaperone get to visit all kinds of landmarks around the country, including Washington, D.C., and will be a stop on that visit. And then particular to students and teachers, we've got a number of things. We have a partnership with the American Library Association to publish teacher guides that are called Discover and Learn with the Library. We've just published the first one, which is on the civil rights movement, earlier this year, and then later will be, I think it's early next year or early this summer, I forget the date exactly, but we are going to be coming out with a special edition for America 250, looking at the Revolution and the early Federalist period. So within those books, it has tons of great reproductions of primary sources and ideas for how to use it in the classroom, and some short essays written by subject matter experts and our educational resource specialists. So that's definitely something to be looking out for.
Nikki?
Yeah, we are extremely excited about A250, as you might imagine, because as the agency that holds the Declaration of Independence, this is kind of our thing. So there are a number of things that we are doing at NARA in general. I mean, one of the ways that we are really celebrating A250 is that normally so NARA has so many of these treasures, right? These important documents that are like foundational in our nation's history. And we only put so many of them out at a time usually because, we have space limitations, you are worried about security, there's light limitations, right? Light time, like over a 10-year period. So you can't actually have all documents out all the time. So we do a lot of rotating of them, and the ones that we do leave out all the time, like the Charters of Freedom documents, are in very special cases with very special lighting and a controlled environment to make sure that they can be out for those longer periods. So for A250, one of the things that we are doing is we have this initiative called Opening the Vault, where we are pulling out tons of these documents all at once and really trying to get them both out in DC on a rotating basis and also out across the country. And there will be a variety of initiatives to do this, but one of them is happening with the presidential libraries. And I can't say yet which documents are going or too many more details beyond this general impetus to open the vault, but it's exciting. Keep an eye out for news from the Clinton Library because they'll probably be your best source of information as this starts rolling out. Otherwise, at the presidential libraries, we have another initiative that we are launching called Letters to the President. And so this is a collaborative effort across the presidential libraries that is meant to showcase the enduring relationship between the American people and their leaders. So we'll be exploring our nation's history through famous voices as well as everyday voices. And so some libraries will be acting on this differently. Some will have exhibitions. Some will have special educational programming around this or public events. We'll have an interactive website as well where you can explore all of the letters together. What we're hoping to have is about 1,000 letters across the 16 presidential libraries in a curated capacity that people can explore. And through this, one of the things I wanted to mention is a couple of the libraries are having full-scale exhibitions around this. And I can talk about one of them now because it is now public and has already been announced. But this is one at the FDR Library called Signature Moments. And this is the collection of letters, a selection of the collection of letters that FDR received over the course of his presidency. And they include some pretty familiar voices, things like Albert Einstein, Amelia Earhart, Walt Disney, Queen Elizabeth II, Thomas Edison, Frank Sinatra, the Dalai Lama, Shirley Temple, and the list goes on and on and on. And also, at the same time this is coming out, where the FDR Library is showing FDR's personal collection of Revolutionary era documents, since he had a grandfather or great-grandfather who fought in the Revolutionary War, and was a pretty robust collector as well. So this is kind of like a hint of like the sorts of activities that are happening at the individual libraries. So there's really interesting, unique programming that also speaks to these broader multi-library initiatives.
I'm pretty excited to see those. We had a pre-conversation on Zoom, and we actually looked to see whether some of the letters that ourselves or our spouses wrote to the presidents when we were kids were in the National Archives collections at those presidential libraries. And sometimes it takes a little bit of time to track those down, because as you can imagine, not everything might be fully processed just yet. So my letter to Ronald Reagan, I don't think it got found within the last week.
I don't think they found my husband's either to Clinton.
And sometimes NARA will just collect a representative sample of a certain type of correspondence. And so NARA does not necessarily keep every single letter from every elementary school student that wrote to a president, but does keep an interesting selection of them. And one of the letters that NARA did end up keeping was a letter from the director of the Carter Library, Meredith Evans, who, when she was 4 years old, sent $1.10 to Jimmy Carter for his campaign for the presidency. And got to talk about this the first time that she met him when she became the director of the library, back when he was still alive.
That's really great. I was talking with Kathleen's summer intern who was reading through some of the letters to President Clinton this afternoon, and she said one of the ones that she read today was from Bono about Africa to President Clinton. So she read that, and she read some letters from kids who really wanted the president to help with situations that they were facing with their family and their hometown. So with that in mind, if you had to pick like a document that's one of your most favorite primary sources from your collections, could you single out one or two that you think is just really cool?
Yeah, so I thought a lot about this question, and when I discovered that I have this museum education background, and I really gravitate towards the 3D objects, but thinking about documents in particular, I love reading diaries of sort of everyday people, and how to me, I realize it's kind of like reading social media in that you get these real-time reactions to historic events. And a really dramatic example is that through another program at the library called the Veterans History Project, we have the diary of a Marine soldier who was stationed during World War II in the Pacific. And he kept a very diligent diary, and there's a particular date, I can't remember exactly what it was, but you can see his pencil suddenly scrawl off the page. And it's because that was the moment his position was bombed. And you know, a few days at the bottom of the page, it's date a few days later, talking about what happened. And I think that's so incredible that we have that, and getting to see an everyday person's reaction to these big events going on. So that if we're going 2D, that's my answer. If I have time for a 3D item.
Sure.
Okay. I love this one because it has an Arkansas connection as well. And this is an item that's currently on display, actually, in the Jefferson Building. It's a Marshall Islands stick chart, which is a map. It's a navigational tool for getting around the islands and the Marshall Islands Atoll. I see some nods, so I think some of you will probably know what these look like. And they're you know, I don't know if it's bamboo or just some other kind of flexible wood. There's seashells, and they're so interesting to me on a few different levels. One, they're beautiful, and then two, it's representing not what we might assume, which would be the shape of the water or the shape of the land. Instead, it's the shape of the currents and the water bouncing off the island. So it's almost like a negative space idea of navigation. And so I love how it represents to me this wide range in human creativity and making sense of our world. And then the other piece is that I use this with teachers sometimes because it's not a very familiar item, and so it really forces them into the role of a student who maybe doesn't have the decades of prior knowledge and context that they have as adults. And so they have to rely on their observation to make sense of it. And I was using it for the first time about a year ago with a group of teachers who had gathered at the library for a rural education symposium. And lo and behold, there were a few teachers from Springdale, Arkansas. Some of them were here earlier today, actually, and they immediately knew what this was. And so that's how I learned that Springdale, Arkansas has the largest population of Marshall Islanders outside of the islands themselves. And that's made me even more interested in the item, in learning more about Arkansas. So that's been an exciting journey for me.
That was pretty interesting. Nikki, what about you?
Well, since we are on the letters to the president topic, I have such a soft spot for the letters from the children. There's a bunch of these that I adore. So one of them is from the Reagan Library, and it's this kid named Andy. And Andy wrote to President Reagan to request FEMA funding because his mother declared his bedroom to be a disaster zone. And then similarly, I was talking to Kathleen yesterday, and she was going through some of the letters to President Clinton. And there was a child who wrote to President Clinton. I'm imagining that he's writing this from time out in his bedroom, thinking that he had been excessively punished and writing down all the amendments to the Constitution that he could find that supported his claim that he was unfairly and excessively punished. And he sent it to President Clinton and asked if he knew of any others. And I thought I might close by reading you another one of these letters that I adore. So this one is to President Eisenhower. And it's from 3 girls, and it says, "Dear President Eisenhower, my girlfriends and I are writing all the way from Montana. We think it's bad enough to send Elvis Presley 3 underlines in the Army, but if you cut his sideburns off, we will just die. Now, you don't know how we feel about him. I really don't see why you have to send him to the Army at all, but we beg you, please, please don't give him a GI haircut. Oh, please, please don't. If you do, we will just die. Signed, Elvis Presley lovers, 2 underlines, Linda Kelly, Sherry Bain, Nikki Matson. Presley, Presley is our cry, Presley. and then a heart that's with EP lovers inside of it. And those of you from Arkansas may know that this story, the next step of the story was Elvis then going to Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, and getting the GI haircut right in your backyard.
That's a great story. Well, thank you guys so much for sharing information about your libraries with us. And I think we have time for 1 or 2 questions from the audience if we have a couple.
I have a question for Nikki. Why did the Obamas decide to privatize their library as opposed to federalize it? And is that why it's taking so long to open? It's been 9 years since the administration ended.
So the question was, why did the Obamas decide to privatize their library instead of going through the presidential library system? And is that why it's taken so long to open?
That is a great question. I cannot answer on behalf of the Obama Foundation for why they made this decision, but I can say that there were some changes to the percentage calculation in terms of budgeting around the time that Barack Obama would have opened the presidential library. So that may have had something to do with the decision, but I would definitely check the FAQs on the Obama Foundation website and see how they present it in their own words.
Thank you.
Yes.
First of all, I want to thank you guys.
She's bringing you in.
I'm bringing it now. They won't let me run in the library.
Hi, well, first of all, I want to really thank you guys for the time and also the inspiration, because I feel a little bit more inspired now. I'm going to be a teacher in high school next year. I'm working on a second career type thing, so
Fantastic.
Ideally, I want to teach world history in 11th grade, but I don't know what's going to happen next year when I finish my master's. Anyway, point is that I grew up in D.C., one of those things where you don't appreciate what you have as much when you're there. So when I raised my hand, like, who's been there? I probably was there on a field trip, in elementary school, but I have not set foot in the Library of Congress since then. I've just sort of walked by giving tours to my friends and things like that. You said you are a teacher, or?
I'm a history professor, but I used to be a high school teacher.
Okay, well, as I'm getting into that, for more inspiration, I was going to ask, how would I go from the resources you gave me online and sort of incorporate that into lessons? Broad question, whatever your thoughts are.
That's a great question, and it's one that's at the heart of what we do. So if you go to our teachers page, you'll find there's even a Getting Started with Primary Sources section, and that can give you some language for understanding why we think primary sources are so important, particularly if you need to maybe convince some admin of the value. And then we also have resources and tools to get you started, links to some of our curated primary source sets that make it kind of easy, grab and go, find the topic, get started. And then in our professional development section, you'll see a few different things. One, each summer we have summer institutes in which teachers come to us in DC and work with us for 3 days and learn about a lot of the strategies that we use, and not just we as educators, but subject matter experts, researchers. These are the strategies that they use when they want to learn more using primary sources. But obviously we gear them for the classroom. And then we also have some presentations that you can look at online, and also a slightly new thing for us, we have these self-paced modules. So there's about 4 of them in total, and they each have a different topic, focusing on different strategies, and they take about an hour. They give you a little certificate at the end that you can submit for continuing education credits. And so that, that's sort of a easy, or it's a little easier than coming to DC anyway, if you want to learn about the strategies that we encourage when it comes to using primary sources in the classroom.
I would say get involved with your local social studies council like we have here in Arkansas. We brought in these speakers from the Library of Congress to help us with our conference these last couple of days. And I know the National Archives has also many, many tools for teachers.
Yes, we have many tools for teachers. So similarly, you can find a semi-one-stop shop on archives.gov/education with lots of resources for educators. And this includes things like, this also includes professional development opportunities for teachers, as well as the Civics for All of Us program, Docs Teach, which is where we have tons of NARA documents that are annotated with lesson plans or interactive, where you can kind of click on different parts of the document, which prompts questions with lots of ideas and resources you can use in the classroom. But what I really want to flag are the education pages on each of the presidential libraries' websites. So if you are teaching history or social studies and you want to go deep into a particular time period, definitely check out the presidential libraries of that time period and see what educational resources they have, because often you have like really true experts working on this of subject matter in that area of that historical period. And our educators are so creative. I want everyone to also give a clap for Kathleen Pate, who really brought me here, organized this whole thing along with Jay Barth. She's really a terrific educator. I hope many of you have gotten a chance to meet her.
Okay, last question. Yeah.
Last question. Since America is facing a tremendous amount of government cuts, how will that affect the library? They're trying to cut a lot of, like you said, they're going to have an event for the civil rights. I mean, I'm surprised that they're even allowed with the current administration. So can you talk about if you guys are going to have any cuts to, because they're cutting education. They're talking about it almost every day. So thank you.
It's certainly a question we've been getting a fair amount of, but the truth is that we cannot make any predictions. We are currently funded at the same levels as the last fiscal year through the end of this one, so through September. What comes after that is anyone's guess. So we will keep going till we can't keep going.
And if you value these things, then we need to let our representatives know how important they are to us. So that's something we can all do. Nikki, you've already been impacted by not being able to travel to be with us in person. Do you want to talk about any other impact that you know of for your institutions?
Well, we are definitely trying to cut expenses at the National Archives just across the board. There has been a national effort to reorganize to increase efficiency, and we are in the process of piloting that and experimenting with that, and we will see how this shakes out. Like right now, we are very much in a period of things in motion, and we'll see.
Yeah, so keep telling everybody how important it is, right? Right. Well, thank you all very much, and I think Kathleen has something she wants to say. That's right. Of course.
I promise I will keep it brief. Thank you guys so much for coming out tonight. I'm Kathleen Pate, Director of Education and Public Programs here at the library. And this has been in planning for months. So it's amazing to see everyone here, to see it come to fruition. It's the kind of conversation that I love to have. And sir, if you're going to be a teacher in Arkansas, let's connect because we have a lot of resources. Thank you, Nikki, for the shout out to presidential libraries. We have, like Docs teach, curated collections. We have lesson plans. We have all kinds of resources. And my favorite thing to say, I will close with this. Everything we do for students and teachers is free. Free, 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 free. All right. So thank you guys for coming out. Safe travels. Thank you to Dr. Mann, thank you to Abby, thank you to Nikki, and good night.